beverages like Coke and Pepsi are down, which is true. The consumption of some of the other sugar-sweetened beverages that I showed in the slides is up. So to say that people are consuming fewer calories in liquid form than was the case before is simply not true. They will argue that sugar isn't so important, that you're basically picking on us. There are lots of other things contributing to the diet, and sugar isn't so important. But as we heard before, there's scientific evidence suggesting that there is something different about sugar, especially when delivered in liquid form. They'll say that it's about physical activity. Physical activity is certainly important for overall health, but several recent, very compelling studies suggest that dietary intake is far more important than declining physical activity in explaining the nation's obesity epidemic. They will argue, as the tobacco industry did when they said smoking doesn't cause lung cancer and nicotine isn't addictive, that the science on this issue isn't clear. But I ask you to look at who funds the science that makes it unclear, and what you'll find is a major agreement among scientists in the field, as you see in the table here, that there is a causal relationship. Next, all calories are equal, so a food is a food is a food, but we heard before that there is poor calorie compensation for food delivered in calories delivered in liquid form. So just to make up an example, let's say that Senators Alquist and Padilla had identical twin siblings, and you ate at lunch, and you and your sibling had exactly the same amount of calories at the lunch, but 200 of those calories for one of you came in liquid form, let's say a sugared beverage, and another one you had 200 extra calories, but it came in solid form. The one of you that had the liquid calories will compensate less well later for the excess calories than the one that took in the same number of calories but in solid form. And you can imagine the cumulative effect of this, of having a sugared sweetened beverage day after day after day, sometimes multiple times a day. And then the final trump card that the industry will argue is that if you do something to reduce sugar-sweetened beverages, people will lose jobs. Well, the tobacco industry had a little bit of an argument there because they sold one product. But in the case of the beverage industry, they sell other beverages, such as water, that are considerably healthier. So if people migrate from less to more healthy products, they'll probably be better off. So how worried is the industry? A lot. There was information that just came out yesterday that I list here, that the beverage industry has spent $24 million in lobbying and advertising in the first 9 months of 2009, and that's essentially a fight against the idea of sugar-sweetened beverage taxes. So the industry is worried about this, as they should be, given the compelling science and given the nationwide movement to try to do something about this. So in summary, sugar-sweetened beverages have 4 compelling characteristics that make them worth doing something about from a public health point of view. Number 1 is that they're marketed relentlessly. You'll hear more about that later. Second is they're clearly linked to obesity. Third is they're clearly linked to diabetes. And finally, they're the single greatest source of added sugar in the American diet. So I believe there's a compelling case for taking public health action to reduce consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's open up with questions. Let me toss out the first couple, and then I'll recognize Senator Alquist and Senator Price. Mr. Rudd, not Rudd, the Rudd Centers who you work for, Mr. Brownell, Dr. Brownell, excuse me. Actually had a chance to flip through the summary of the report you were referring to up here, and a couple of things that really caught my eye. You talk about your assessment of other reports and other studies, and in the Industry Trade Association reports, you call out one of their findings that it's unfair to pick on soft drinks because there are many causes of obesity and there are no good versus bad foods. I know you touched on it as a theme towards the end of your presentation there, but can you expand on the good foods versus bad foods piece that you're referring to?
Sure. Without getting into an argument about whether there are good and bad foods, you can certainly say that there are better and worse foods as consumed by the population. And so the industry, in saying don't pick on us, they'll say, well, people are eating a lot of pizza or people are eating a lot of hamburgers and things. But I defy them to find a body of evidence as strong as what exists for the intake of sugar-sweetened beverages. So we believe that public health action shouldn't be taken without some scientific evidence, at least, and hopefully in a strong body of scientific evidence, and this evidence is strongest for sugar-sweetened beverages, and really not even close.
And I guess just to underscore your point that, not all calories are created equal. Some have make up the term value added to a well-balanced diet versus others that don't have the value added compared to others. Another one of your sort of findings or themes in the report talked about a link between soft drink consumption versus lower intakes of milk and dairy products. Can you talk about that for a minute?
In the mid-1990s, the lines crossed with population consumption of milk and population consumption of sugared beverages. So before that time, in the mid-90s, the population was consuming more milk, less sugar-sweetened beverages, but that reversed at that point, and the lines are still different, where the consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages exceeds that of milk.
Yeah, and it's just one of my observations when I saw the UCLA study, and I'm thinking not just about having the hearing, but what it all means. You know, clearly people have options when you walk up and down the aisles of the supermarket, and parents have options as to what to put on the table for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And part of our reality, for better, for worse, rightly or wrongly, part of our reality is that soda is 99.9% of the time cheaper than milk. And so for families on a budget, families struggling to make ends meet, sometimes they're making a choice by reasons other than what's best for our kids. You know, many ways to go about it, a lot of underlying reasons for how we got to this point, but that crossing in your chart in the mid-90s is not insignificant in my opinion. Thank you for sharing that. My next question goes to Ms. Lopez, and that's breaking it down by age in some of your analysis. I mean, we can have sort of a kid's conversation, first graders, second graders. We can have an adult conversation of what's good or bad, levels of intake, this and that. Are there any critical age ranges or age groups where this is more concerning to you?
Well, unfortunately, I think it's concerning at all age groups. The age groups that consume the most sweetened beverages would be adolescents, teenagers, and young adults, two of the groups that have had the highest rises in obesity rates here. But I think even more disturbing, even though they're not the highest consumers, are the preschoolers and young children who have, I don't have the figures right here in front of me, are also consuming sweetened beverages on a regular basis, and that's when the habits really get formed. And we're seeing obesity rates climbing very steeply in that population. It's very disturbing to think that they're not only drinking these sweetened beverages, but it is, as Dr. Brownell mentioned, replacing milk and other healthier foods that these children need.
Okay. And you know, in the report, I'm sorry, back to the UCLA study, you talk about sort of the average consumption, you know, per day for adults, for kids. Was it How did your graph look? Was it pretty standard bell curve where it's kind of a solid, consistent 1 can per kid per day, or was there a big range? Was there a big spike for just a little bit of soda and a big spike for big-time consumption?
Well, we looked at the percent of all ages who were drinking 1 or more sodas a day, and similar to what Gail just mentioned, we see the highest rates among adolescents and teenagers. There are also high rates among young adults, but even among kids as young as 2 to 5, we see a third drinking soda every day.
Okay. Senator Alquist?
Thank you very much. First, a statement and then some questions. I found it really interesting, Dr. Brownell, that you said that there's something different about sugar, especially when it's delivered in liquid form. I think that's very compelling. Some questions, some will seem very simplistic, but you'll see where I'm going. Has the soda industry, in your opinion, done any benchmark studies not showing a connection between sweetened beverages and obesity that are not funded by them?
I'm not aware of the industry itself doing studies. Generally, they'll fund people in academic settings to do studies, and well, there are a few exceptions.
And I will ask them the same question.
Okay, but my impression